Hey everyone, good afternoon. This session we're going to talk about digital workspaces, which hopefully that's a term that you've heard of before. And the topic here is securely enabling access to apps and data from anywhere. And to give you a little bit of background, my name is Dane Young. I'm the virtualization practice manager with an organization here in California called Entisys360. We are a systems integrator, a reseller of hardware and software solutions, and we have a large presence from a professional services perspective. About half of our team is engineers and consultants in the field working with customers. You can find our website at Entisys360.com. The hardest part in that is spelling Entisys. A lot of people flip-flop the Y and the I, but it's I first and then Y. So Enterprise Information Systems is ultimately what that stands for. And then you can find my blog, just my name.com, so daneyoung.com. And I blog about a lot of different topics focused around virtualization and infrastructure. So a lot of our partners' primary focus is in that category: data center, operations, infrastructure, Citrix, Microsoft, VMware, HP, NetApp, and Cisco are our top premier partners that we work with. We have the highest partnership status with all of those. So to give you a little bit of background on what we're going to be talking about today, first I'm going to define for you what is the digital workspace and how does that operate within organizations. Summarize the current landscape and some of the challenges that we see out there with organizations that are deploying and managing digital workspaces. Discuss the role of virtualization and abstraction in creating this digital workspace. Talk about Windows, mobility, data management, and ultimately the future, some things that are coming down the pipe in terms of how people are interacting with technology in this workspace. And then talk about the importance of security. And finally talk a little bit about some of the digital workspace benefits and what you can come to expect from deploying this type of infrastructure within your organization. So a little bit of industry statistics and predictions. IDC, Gartner, Forrester, these are kind of the main leading analyst firms that have predictions around these types of technologies. And IDC is predicting that cloud services are going to represent 48% of all IT infrastructure spending in the next 3 years. And so as more and more organizations are adopting cloud, they're having to deal with, what's the fiscal impact of that? What's the financial impact of moving from a capital expenditure type of model to an operational expenditure model, moving from a traditional perpetual license to a subscription license, those types of things. And so the trend is increasing. This could be infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, software as a service. It's ultimately how you interact and engage with those technology services. Gartner predicts that by 2018, which is just around the corner, 50% of the public cloud applications that are deployed and managed in public clouds will be considered mission critical to the organizations that use them. So a couple years ago, we were largely talking about public cloud for test dev type of use cases, for doing your development up in the public cloud, and then once it's ready to go into production, then you bring it back internally and you run it on-prem. And a lot of organizations are finding that they're shifting predominantly to public cloud, even for their mission critical applications. And a lot of people were hesitant towards cloud because of security reasons. And now what we're seeing is more organizations want to leverage cloud because at the economies of scale that public clouds operate, they have a lot more exposure to threats that you as an internal organization might not have capabilities to remediate. I'll give a couple examples later on. So Gartner predicts that by 2019, so 2 or 3 years from now, over 30% of the 100 largest vendor software developments will be cloud only. So it's really making this shift from this whole cloud first methodology or mentality to a cloud only type of approach. So the equivalent would be like Office 365. When you buy Office 365, you get all the web apps, but you also can run the software on premises in your data center or on your PCs running the traditional office software. More and more solutions are going to be shifting more towards a true SaaS model, which is subscription-based, hosted, cloud-based, and many of them are going to be cloud-only, like Salesforce.com, Workday, some of those other SaaS applications. Many of you might be saying, how does this relate to me? I sit in an organization that has a no cloud policy. That may be the case today, but almost assuredly it's not going to be the case in the future. Again, Gartner predicts that today we have organizations that have this whole no internet policy. They might be in healthcare, finance, or federal government secured environments. So they say no external access to the internet. We'll cordon off things and not allow access to the internet. It still happens out there, but it's becoming a lot more rare because once something breaks out in that type of environment, it's a lot harder to stop it if it's not well protected from the get-go. So in the future, this is going to be the case with no cloud. It's going to become less and less common that you talk to an organization and say, we've absolutely banned cloud technologies. We can't leverage cloud. It's not going to be the way of the future. And then equally importantly, data and analytics, what this trade show is talking about is this shift in terms of big data and analytics. This is increasingly becoming more substantial or significant for organizations, creating value both inside and outside their organizations. So whether your end customers are getting advantages from that big data analytics or your organization is getting value, this is happening more and more. And what we see is that this digital workspace is really the front door, the gateway into harnessing all that power that exists in your data center or in your cloud and being able to drive business outcomes from that. So, big data, analytics, they drive modern business operations. This shifts the way that organizations use data and analytics towards driving new approaches to data architectures. What it's requiring is an end-to-end architecture to support that approach, and ultimately organizations are making this not just part of the technology strategy, but part of the business strategy. If you look at things like Netflix with their recommendation system, right? This is an example of big data and analytics that's providing value outside of the organization. So when you watch and you rate movies, it gives you recommendations based on that intelligence that they're doing with things like deep learning, artificial intelligence, all of that computation that they have in the data center. So let's talk a little bit about digital workspace. You may have heard this term thrown around in the context of like VDI or virtual desktop infrastructure, enterprise mobility management. An organization might say, hey, we adopted VDI, we've got a digital workspace. What I'd propose is that it's more than just a single technology that enables this digital workspace. It's a framework for delivering desktops, applications, the delivery architecture behind it, and it's contextually aware and provides secure access to the devices, applications, and the data. So it's more than just a point product. It's the products combined together with contextuality to know when a user is coming in, where they're coming in from, and granting them certain access by that. When stitched together, the digital workspace provides a singular end user experience for PCs, for mobile devices, helps the end users become more productive and better serve their customers in moments of need. And your customers, your end users, may be developers that are interacting with this big data system, this analytics system. They need an access methodology that's secure, that provides anywhere access, that enables them to do their jobs more freely and create more productivity. Because ultimately what we're driving towards is more business value, and that ultimately is based on anywhere access. It also provides secure access to the devices, the apps, and the data. So it allows the tech management team to have more control and visibility into the end user portfolios, ensuring compliance and efficiency, effectively managing the updates and the licensing issues across multiple form factors. Unlike desktop virtualization or mobility management alone, it's not a single technology, like I mentioned. Instead, it's an approach to workforce enablement that aims at delivering the best technology for the right employee in the correct context. So this means it utilizes a portfolio of tools that are optimized to give employees the best user experience, whether they're in the office, at a client site, or on the road. Mobility is ever increasing. Ultimately, this ensures higher productivity, because when people can access the apps and the data and the workspaces that they need to get their job done from anywhere, it enables them to be more productive. So while VDI or enterprise mobility management can form part of a digital workspace strategy, they rarely constitute the fully functional digital workspace on their own. They need other technologies to complement them, to address gaps, to roll out the user experience for the employee. An example would be self-service and automation, orchestration, being able to allow your users to have some choice in the way that they consume services that are being provided. That could be a part of an overall digital workspace strategy. So give you a little visual to help kind of fill this out. You know, it's providing the anywhere access from any device, from any location, and ultimately the pieces that make up that digital workspace are the applications, the desktops, the data, the collaboration. Things like Slack are becoming very popular out there for real-time communication and collaboration among teams. Other things like Skype for Business, you guys probably have deployed in your infrastructure, SharePoint and things like that. And then ultimately keeping the personal separated from the business is important from a user privacy perspective. And enabling secured containerized wipe if you're using a mobility management solution. That's important for the end user as well. They don't want you doing a factory reset on their phone and wiping their cat pictures from the last 5 years, right? So the digital workspace is about mobile, virtual, secure, contextual, and ultimately it's a framework for delivering these things. So let's talk about a little bit about mobile work styles. I'm sure you guys have heard this term before. So what does it mean when we talk about mobile work styles? When we're talking about it, we're talking about empowering people to choose when, where, and how work gets done, giving them a new level of freedom, flexibility, and choice. I recognize in the government this is always a very sensitive subject, and there's also legislation and politics that surround access from certain devices, whether those are bring your own devices or what have you. But I would say that this is shifting even in the government space from the organizations that we're working with. So empowering people to work when, where, and how they choose enables them to drive greater value back to the organization. But some organizations might ask why. Ultimately because we want people to work better. When mobile work styles shift the focus towards what truly drives a business success, the people, it's not about the devices, it's about the people. It's about their access to technology. Mobile work styles are about enabling people to work better, giving them the freedom to work in any way that's best for them. Because when we think about that freedom and flexibility that comes with the mobile work style, we unlock people from being harnessed to physical devices and we unlock their potential. With mobile work styles, people become more productive, they become more responsive, more collaborative, more interactive with the people that they work with, and more creative that enables them to drive innovation in whatever their respective business unit might be or department might be. Because people work better when they live better. And when you enable anywhere access, the beautiful thing about enabling anywhere access and having a work from anywhere type of methodology is that you enable an anywhere access and work from anywhere methodology. The downside to that is you have an anywhere access and work from anywhere methodology. So naturally, just as a person that's attached to technology all the time, it's very difficult to disconnect in this case because I'm constantly checking on things, constantly making sure that all the things are falling in line the way that they should be. And you'll find that as you enable this, more of your users will do the same, which ultimately naturally drives higher rates of productivity. So when they live better and get out of the 9-to-5 regiment and work in a more 24-hour workday type of time slicing approach, it provides freedom and flexibility. It allows them to create harmony in their lives between their work and their life and everything else that they have going on. We're not the only ones that are talking about this. We're hearing the same thing straight from the businesses and organizations just like yours. So again, back to this whole notion of anywhere, anytime, on any device. This is ultimately what digital workspaces are driving towards. It's about increasing productivity, it's about increasing security, enabling a front door access to infrastructure and big data analytics systems that enable your people to get access to that infrastructure from anywhere. Instead of having to download big payloads of data to crunch it locally, they can just remote in and get access to those resources in a cloud-like function. Whether that's on premises in your data center or hosted, that's kind of subjective, neither here nor there. It's the concept of creating this type of value that we're talking about. All right, so some of the landscape and the challenges like we were talking about. Again, employees, and this is becoming more and more relevant even in government organizations. They want access to their applications, to their data, to their desktops. You know, people are very comfortable with the Windows desktop experience, right? They want access to that type of experience from anywhere, from any device, whether that's a bring your own or organization provided. They want access to their workspaces in that case. The explosion of data, you know, we've been talking at this event about big data analytics, the data growth rate. I'm sure you've seen some of the predictions about how fast data is exploding within organizations, and things like IoT are ultimately going to impact this even greater because it's just going to be that much more data. As this data explodes, having that data decentralized and not in a central secured location or multiple centralized secured locations, it becomes a data management nightmare. And so creating architectures that align with centralizing that data, centralizing that access, it creates new opportunities for you to address some of those operational and management challenges around data management, data integrity, data security, data resiliency and protection, things like backup, replication, disaster recovery strategies. And we're seeing, at least in the commercial and enterprise sector, we're seeing organizations, actually facilities departments within organizations adapting to this new trend of mobility. People are actually restructuring their facilities because folks aren't at their desk 40 to 60% of the time anymore. And so why would you have dedicated cubicle space or dedicated office space when you could have huddle areas or kiosk stations or hoteling areas that people can come in, they can work for a short period of time, they can go to their next meeting, they can go to a conference room, they can have collaboration spaces that better optimize that real estate and that investment that the organization is making. And so these trends ultimately affect all areas of business. Again, like I mentioned, facilities organizations are actually adapting to this and creating better workspaces that are more aligned with this whole digital workspace notion. So this ultimately creates a lot of challenges. I'm going to talk about some of the challenges for businesses and some of the challenges for IT. You've probably seen this within your organizations. Employees and contractors alike are bringing in personal devices and wanting to connect those to the organization's network and access data that is secured on those personal devices. And a lot of times this is out of necessity or out of some type of requirement from a contractual perspective because devices weren't being provided as part of that contract. Or it's simply because the tablet or the smartphone is more flexible to that contractor or that non-employee than the corporate issued PC. So in many cases, executives who want access on their personal devices, they're ultimately the ones that are driving this type of adoption, right? It first started a couple years ago with everybody being on a BlackBerry, and there was organization-issued BlackBerries. And who were the first people that said when the iPhone came out, I need to be able to get my email on this iPhone? It was the executives. And they were the ones that drove that and said, this is a smarter device for me, it's a better device for me, I'm going to have it for my personal use anyways, why can't I get ActiveSync and my email enabled on this device? And it created this big operational challenge, a big security challenge. What happens if we mix company data with personal data, and what happens if that employee leaves, especially if they're an executive? You're not going to wipe their cat pictures again. So it creates this challenge with that demarcation point between the personal and the corporate. And I think that demarcation is ultimately one of the key elements of a digital workspace that we're talking about. The bring your own device or BYOD devices that are being accessed, they're accessing business applications. A lot of times they're downloading data that of course can't be secured because you don't have any control over that device. And in some cases, there's enterprise Windows applications that have been perfected over the years that are designed for Windows endpoints that people are bringing into the enterprise and then connecting to the data and accessing the data that way. In some cases, we're looking at high-end engineering or graphical applications. We work with a lot of agencies that work in GIS, and they have GIS data or engineering data, CAD type of data that they need access to, and that ultimately requires a much beefier workstation to get access to that. And what happens if they're mobile and they're in the field or they're real-time inspecting one of their work locations or sites? How do they get access to those maps and that geodata when they're out in the field and they're mobile? Those are some of the challenges that we're seeing out there. Oftentimes it requires much more expensive hardware. If you want to talk about expensive hardware, look in the healthcare space and these FDA certified systems that they do diagnosis on. Some of these systems are $15,000 to $20,000 per unit to deploy in these radiology, oncology environments. And so there's a high cost to that, and there's a high refresh rate. Generally, they refresh every 2 to 3 years. And that's a big investment to make in order to not get the full value out of that infrastructure investment. Other organizations that we're working with, and maybe this doesn't apply to government, but we're finding a lot of, whether it's outsourced or just offshore, we're finding a lot of follow the sun models where people are wanting to access the infrastructure across multiple teams that are collaborating together, but they're in different time zones. And so with them being in different time zones, you could have an 8-hour work shift, an 8-hour work shift, and an 8-hour work shift, effectively get 3 days worth of productivity in one 24-hour time period. And that collaboration requires a central access methodology so that those people can interact with the same data, the same applications, real time in some cases as they're doing an hour transition on either side, transitioning to the next team. So those are some of the things that we're seeing in more global markets as well. But ultimately, access to these applications and the data and the desktops and the workspaces, it needs to be secured. Remote and branch offices, they need to be just as productive as employees located at the headquarters. And oftentimes we see organizations where people at HQ have a great end user computing experience. Their desktops are LAN connected to the data center or LAN connected to the infrastructure that's sitting in a closet. And they have a great experience. But you go out to a branch office that might be off of a poorly connected WAN circuit, their experience is not the same. And talk about people that are in more executive level positions, many of those are the travelers. They're the road warriors. They're often going from one location to the next, to the next, to the next, and ensuring that consistent experience as they travel and as they roam, if you will, that becomes very important. A lot of our organizations that we're working with, especially in healthcare, if you've gone to like Sutter or Kaiser or any of those local hospitals, you've seen they have badges that they carry around with them, and they badge in, badge out on these stations, and the applications follow them at these stations that they log into. And so creating that seamless user experience for quick access to technology, that's ultimately what we're talking about with this digital workspace. So when you're talking about users that are roaming or users that are mobile, centralizing that data enables them to get access to that data anywhere. If they had local profiles, local My Documents, local desktop shortcuts that were different at every single station that they logged into, it would be a horrible user experience. Centralizing that enables them to be more productive because they don't have to think about, oh, is that document saved at this other location or did I save it at my home office? Or it's always on my laptop, and what happens if the laptop going through TSA and security gets compromised and lost in the airport? And you know, the stories are endless, right?